How are we doing, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're talking 5 wide receivers that I think have league-winning upside if they're able to capitalize on their situation and their schedule down the stretch of this fantasy season. Again, these are very talented players and options I think could have key contributions to your fantasy teams here in the biggest games of this season as we make our way down the stretch of 2021. So, with that being said, we're not wasting any more time. Let's hit the intro and get straight in to our first league-winning wide receiver. As we get into Devonta Smith here, today's episode is brought to you guys by ThriveFantasy.com, my personal favorite way to bet this NFL season. Their prop betting section on their app is by far my favorite, and we've had some great success with it so far this season. For those of you who are looking for some advice or some guidance on your props, you can go down to the description of today's episode and click the link to join our community Discord server. There I post all the props I make on a given week-to-week basis, and we can kind of compare and bounce ideas off of each other for the lines at the time that you are making those prop bets. But when you go sign up to become a member on Thrive Fantasy, use promo code Sizzle when you deposit between $10 and $100. They'll give you a 100% instant deposit match bonus. So again, using promo code Sizzle, SIZZLE, and you put down between $10 and $100, you're going to get that doubled because they will match whatever you put in. And on top of that, they will let me know within a few days that you signed up, deposited, played on your account. They'll let me know that, and I'll give you a free month of SFS Gold on us for becoming a Thrive member and helping us out. SFS Gold has our weekly positional rankings for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and defenses for half PPR scoring. And then on that community Discord server where we give out our prop betting advice, you will also get access to my private DMs where you can send me screenshots of your lineups, ask me questions, and all of that good stuff for your NFL weeks. And that'll be, again, for a free month. So with that being said, Devonta Smith is our first league-winning wide receiver here. I've been loving what I've seen from Devonta Smith the past 2 weeks. This is the classic second half of the season breakout for young rookies, especially at the wide receiver position. Him and Jalen Hurts are starting to develop and build upon their chemistry that we've ultimately seen flashes of this season, but they've always been a half step or half second, half count, whatever you want to call it, off, and that's resulted in them missing on some bigger plays throughout the year. The past 2 weeks, though, a tough matchup against the Chargers and no easy contest against the Denver Broncos this week. They have given up some points so far this season, but last week especially, in the early on stages of this year, they've had some very, very stout stretches as well. I was impressed from what I saw by Devonta Smith. The one thing I especially loved to see from Devonta Smith in this matchup was he went up, made the tough grab in the end zone on his birthday. By the way, happy birthday to Devonta Smith. Goes up and mosses his former teammate Patrick Surtain, top pick in this year's draft, just right in front of Devonta Smith. Goes up, makes a tough catch, scores 6 for us, and then finds the end zone again later on in that contest. Had his best game of this fantasy season. 4 grabs, 66 yards, and again, 2 touchdowns. What I love about Devonta Smith is you're going to start to see him and Jalen Hurts, now that they've got that chemistry and that connection going, they're going to start throwing more. I shouldn't say they are, but Jalen's going to start looking Devonta Smith's way more. He is starting to separate himself from the rest of the pack as the clear number 1 option in this offense. We've seen other guys in the mix so far this season, whether it's Quez Watkins, Jalen Reagor, who is now injured, but earlier on this season. Whatever the case was, Devonta Smith was always thought of as the number 1 option, but now he's starting to put that into action and actually put up the points and give us the eye test value for what he can truly be here in this offense. And the cherry on top here is the rest of season schedule. Washington twice during the fantasy playoffs and the Giants. 3 divisional opponents. Washington had a very impressive win against Tampa Bay this past week. They probably played their best game defensively of the season. You can argue that whether or not, but they were still quite good on the defensive side of the ball. But the key loss here was Chase Young, their star young pass rusher. He may not be with us for the rest of the year after suffering what looked like a pretty bad knee injury. So they're losing some juice in their pass rush. That's going to give Jalen and other quarterbacks this fantasy season some more comfortability, some more time in the pocket that can be key to hitting those wide receivers downfield. And again, you're getting Washington twice in a 3-week window. To me, that's not a ton of turnaround. You're going to have a quick glance at the tape when assessing how to improve yourself from one performance to another, but I don't think that they're going to be able to entirely flip the script of their preparation between those two contests. And ultimately, I think that will work in the favor of Devonta Smith and this Eagles offense. And potentially these two teams could be vying for one of the final NFC playoff spots. We'll see how that all plays out here. But I think Devonta Smith, down the stretch of this season, will be a very, very strong lineup start. And with the struggles Washington's secondary has had throughout the bigger picture of this season, I think Devonta should have some nice opportunity in those two matchups. Brandon Aiyuk is another wide receiver I am absolutely starting to love. Now, he does play tonight. This video is coming out early on Monday morning, so we have yet to see him in the contest against the Los Angeles Rams. But I'm feeling very confident about Aiyuk's ability to produce in that matchup. My expectation is that Deebo Samuel will see a lot of attention, and we'll see Jalen Ramsey travel with him throughout this game. And that's going to leave Brandon Aiyuk on the backside of things, working on the Rams' number 2 corner almost every snap of this game. Now, some motion and some schemes will ultimately, done intentionally by Kyle Shanahan, will ultimately probably get some switches where they have Aiyuk working against Ramsey for a couple plays, trying to separate Deebo and get him out there in space working. But I think this should overall be a very nice game for Brandon Aiyuk. And the thing I love here is that last week, back in week 9, or rather, yes, week 9, this is currently week 10, the Monday night game is going to finish this week off. In week 9, the offense was finally balanced in almost equally distributing the passes between Samuel, Aiyuk, and George Kittle in terms of just having them all involved, getting passes thrown their way. That's how they got to work the rest of this season, Get the ball to your star playmakers, but don't overemphasize one guy over another. That'll keep defenses honest, keep coverage light on all 3 of them, or at least light in respect to not entirely focusing all of their attention on Deebo Samuel, because with how dialed in they were to Deebo early on this season, that was a fear of mine going forward the rest of the year, that they would just bracket him, double him up, send the toughest coverage his way each and every single play. But now hopefully the 49ers offense has things rolling, and that shouldn't be the case here. But Atlanta, Tennessee, Houston, those are the matchups during the fantasy playoffs for Brandon Aiyuk, all very exploitable. In particular, you love to see that Tennessee matchup in the fantasy semifinals. And then Houston, those are probably 2 teams that aren't going to be in the vying for playoff contention late in the year. But hopefully Brandon Aiyuk can get out there and get some work done against that group. And the key thing for me with Aiyuk here is, as the number 2 wide receiver in this offense, Deebo Samuel is almost always going to draw the toughest assignment. That's going to leave Aiyuk, who is a very, very talented player, finally looks healthy, twitchy on the field again. It's going to get him out in space, working against a team's second best corner, which will increase the ceiling of opportunity for him all the further. Jaylen Waddle, another young receiver. So far, all wideouts on this list have been either in their rookie season or are a second-year player in the case of Brandon Aiyuk. I love Jaylen Waddle, love the talent, love what we saw from him this past week, and another example of a great fantasy playoff schedule here. Waddle has been a little bit unexpected in the role that he's playing for this Dolphins offense because of the volume that has been sent his way throughout this portion of the season. Jaylen Waddle, in his last 6 games, has 3 games of 10-plus targets, and he has 6 or more targets in all 6 of those games. So, whereas Jaylen Waddle pre-draft this season and in the summer with our fantasy draft season, I was expecting him to be more of a big splash play downfield, maybe not a super high target volume type player, but I definitely anticipated that he would be making big plays downfield and getting chunk yardage in the opportunities he's given with the football. That has not been the case so far, and we finally started to see a flash of hope for that involvement this past week. We'll get into that in just a second. But overall, it's been underneath, dink and dunk, get the ball quickly out in the flats to Jaylen Waddle on bubble routes, flat routes, drag routes, whatever the case might be, and let him do work after the catch. Now, this past week, while that's been his involvement basically all season, we finally saw Tua put a ball up in the air for him. He jumps up, comes down, and grabs it over Marlon Humphrey one of the games, or at least, but prior to this season, he's having some struggles this year. But Marlon Humphrey has been thought of in regards to the rest of his peers in the NFL as one of the toughest coverage assignments in the National Football League. He goes out there, makes a jump ball, wins a contested grab against Humphrey. Very impressive stuff. So Everything I've seen from Waddle to this point is encouraging because, again, he's been producing very consistent numbers because of the volume coming his way. And now that we're starting to see some more downfield attempts head his direction, if he can tap into that facet of his skill department the rest of the season, that's going to be a huge contribution and potentially untap or unlock another element of his ceiling that we haven't quite seen from him yet this year. So Jaylen Waddle, to go over his fantasy playoff matchups, he's got himself the Jets, the Saints, and the Titans in championship week. That's a great matchup. If you can get yourself the Tennessee Titans, which has been one of the most struggling secondaries this year, in your fantasy championship game, Jaylen Waddle could absolutely be a difference maker for your teams. A.J. Brown, this is one where I feel that A.J. has, other than DeAndre Hopkins, who I have my concerns with his hamstring issue that kept him out of another game this past week, A.J. Brown is the fantasy wide receiver 1 with the easiest championship schedule. A.J. Brown's got himself Pittsburgh, the 49ers, and the Dolphins, so on the other side of that Jaylen Waddle matchup, the last 3 weeks of this year. Now, obviously, Week 18 is a whole nother animal if you're playing, but I would highly recommend, it's probably too late now, but I always recommend that you end your fantasy season the week prior. Now, maybe it's less of an issue this season, and that's something that I suppose is less at play here while we only have one bye week for the actual NFL postseason, as opposed to in years past where we've had the 2 teams get the bye week. Now, last year this was the same situation as well, but where you've got less teams resting players now, I suppose it's not necessarily as important that you end your fantasy seasons a week early, but typically the fantasy playoffs or the fantasy season ends a week prior to the end of the NFL season. So, regardless, a little off topic there. But A.J. Brown, the wide receiver 1 rest of season, so that being a top 12 wide receiver for me for the rest of this fantasy season with the easiest playoff schedule. Again, the Steelers, the 49ers, the Dolphins, all matchups where A.J. Brown's skill set of stretching the field and making plays vertically over the top is very, very easily exploitable. These are teams that have struggled with the downfield passing game, and I think A.J. Brown can come out here and make some splash plays. It's fairly evident. No Derrick Henry. This team is more pass dependent. He had a very strugglesome outing this past week against the Saints, but if you look a little bit deeper than just a raw point production, why did A.J. Brown struggle? The Titans could not formulate a run game. The Saints defense is one of the best in the league at stopping the run, and the Titans love to pass off the play-action game. If you don't have a running game, teams don't fall for the play-action pass, there's your problem. So Marshawn Lattimore, who has also been struggling a little bit this season, is still a very, very good corner, still having maybe it's not the best season of his career, but he's still having a very respectable year. Marshawn Lattimore is still a very, very quality corner in this league. He gave a lot of attention to A.J. Brown in that matchup, and obviously Brown's points, his production took a hit, struggled a little bit. He was not overly productive in that game, but A.J. Brown, absolutely love what he can give to us down the stretch of this season. The last 3 weeks, great schedule, great opportunities. I think he should be able to get some damage done in those games. And then finally here, Corey Davis and or Elijah Moore. So these are 2 players that in particular, we didn't really touch on this too much at the top of today's episode, but these are players for teams gearing up to make championship runs, gearing up to make that playoff push and that deep postseason push here. If you're looking to make some end of the season or at least end of the trade season moves, these are obviously names to keep on your radar. And these are 2 names in particular I think are very, very affordable at this point in time. And with the case of Elijah Moore, you might actually be able to go out and add him off the waiver wire because right now he's owned in under 40% of leagues. But technically, if you were to ask me today, Corey Davis is the wideout to own in this Jets offense. Had a very, very nice game and a tough matchup against the Bills this week. I expected Trey White to do a number on him, but he was able to overcome that. And you're talking about a bad football team in general here that is most often going to be trailing, trying to catch up late, and passing the football in garbage time. Corey Davis and Elijah Moore, though, very, very favorable playoff schedules here for fantasy, as does everyone else on today's list. And the thing that I think makes this a bit more interesting is that the playoff schedule for the running back position in terms of the matchups they have is absolutely brutal. So you're looking at a already struggling football team, a team that in general is playing catch-up late in a lot of their contests, And then you add in the fact that they're going to be increasingly passing game dependent because their running game should struggle in these tougher matchups. Miami, the Jags, and most notably is Tampa Bay in Week 17. Championship week, they're one of the toughest units against the run in the entire league. Now you're working with something here because those teams are exploitable on their back ends. Now, Tampa could be a little bit of a wild card here. We've seen them have good games against the pass. We've seen them have very poor games against the pass. But I think that these two players are talented enough to still post those very high upsides for us in those contests. Whether it's Zach Wilson, Mike White, we saw some Joe Flacco this past week. These guys are going to get the football thrown their way. They're going to get opportunities. And especially in the case of Elijah Moore, his snap counts should be increasing here. He's been increasingly more and more used the last month of this season and given more targets thrown his direction. He's a special player. I think he's going to eventually be a big-time fantasy asset for us as we move into 2022 and beyond. But finishing off this season, the ceiling numbers that he could potentially post and the breakout games he could have are quite exciting to think about in terms of what that can mean to your teams the rest of this year. And then Corey Davis is just another player that flies under the radar, is constantly underrated and not really thought of as a key difference maker. But having either of these players as a flex option late in the year with the matchups that these guys have late, again, the Dolphins, the Jags, and the Buccaneers during that 3-week fantasy playoff stretch, very, very advantageous. Again, high-end flex plays, and two players I'd be very excited about having in my lineups for those games. Alrighty, those were our 5, but technically 6 league-winning fantasy wide receiver options. Again, I love the matchups, love the ceiling for these assets. If you can go out there and afford to make some last-minute trades here as we push closer and closer to those of our leagues that have those trade deadlines for us, these are the names I'm looking at because, again, the postseason schedule is spectacular here. And obviously, if your team is in a strong enough position to maybe sacrifice some games in the short term to make these moves for the long-term run, that's the way to go. These are the players you want to add for your lineup. So with that being said, if you're new around here to the channel, make sure to click that subscribe button before you head on out. We'd love to have you join the SFS community and drop a like on today's video if you enjoyed or found it useful. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace out.